Thank you for listening to this episode, and follow the podcast on social media by finding @Prestigious_pod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, @ChrisBeanOfficial, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousInitiative@gmail.com. Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website. This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Today, I'm joined by Wayne Mullins, a founder and CEO of Ugly Mug Marketing, a company dedicated to delivering real results for businesses. With over 20 years of experience, Wayne has scaled multiple companies and worked with his clients in over 100 different industries. Beyond his entrepreneurial journey, Wayne is passionate about leadership, and today we'll be exploring some of his insights into why leading yourself first is the ultimate leadership lesson. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
So Wayne, why would somebody want to listen in to our conversation here today?
Well, I think first of all that for any of us who are ambitious and desire to improve and get better, throughout the course of our lives, that it's important to hear other people talk about what has led to their success, as well as some of the things that have led to their failures. And so, as Jim Rohn used to say, it's a shame that we don't actually get lessons from a lot of failures because there's so much we could learn from those events. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that this conversation will be beneficial.
Wonderful. So Wayne, you've built an impressive career scaling businesses and working with clients worldwide. Share with me what led you to start Ugly Mug Marketing.
Sure, Chris. I guess, original idea for Ugly Mug Marketing wasn't intentional. So I didn't sit down and scheme up on a napkin this idea for a wonderful marketing agency. It came out of the fact that previously I had built and sold a lawn and landscape company. And during the course of building that company and growing that company, one of the things that happened were clients of the company and other business owners within the areas that we serve started reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, we've seen how much you've grown. We've seen that you've gone from, one crew to multiple crews with multiple vehicles, your logos all over the vehicles and, all the employees in uniforms. Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you actually growing your company?" And so those conversations started with really just kind of friendly consultations, if you will. And then the demand for that just kept increasing. So I started charging. And 3 years into that journey of growing that other company, I decided to put the business up for sale. So I listed that lawn and landscape company with a business broker. I listed it the worst possible time to list that type of business, which was in December. So it's the middle of the winter, revenues are down, just not well thought through, but put it up for sale. And within a few weeks, I had multiple offers on the company. So sold the company, and I really didn't have a solid plan of action in place. I was doing this marketing consulting on the side, and I knew that I had time to figure things out. The sale of the business resulted in a chunk of cash. So I knew I had time. I didn't have to rush to go get a job, rush to find something else to do. And it was really just through the conversations and the consults that I was doing with people that I just decided, you know what, we're providing a lot of value, or I'm adding a lot of value to these businesses. What if I actually made this the next thing that I built? And that's how Ugly Mug Marketing got started.
It's interesting that starting a marketing business wasn't your original intent or your original goal, but you did so good at doing that for your own business that people came to you. You excelled at that thing. People came to you because they wanted to say, "Hey, what are you doing? How can I do this better?" And so that launched you into the position that you're in now. And without the dedication and kind of creative outside the box thinking I'm sure that you were doing at that time, we wouldn't be here today.
Probably not. And again, to what you just said, the point to what you just said is this, that, one of my core beliefs and core philosophies about marketing is this, that if you look around and you survey what all of your competitors are doing in your space, the simplest way for you to stand out and to actually start getting traction with your marketing is to do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. And so you're right, we probably wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation today if it weren't for that one idea. The one idea is don't try to be better than the competition, try to be different than the competition, because different is what is going to cause you, your brand, your product, your services to stand out.
Well, okay, so speaking of standing out and being different, the name and mission of your company are unique. Why prioritize results over aesthetics and trying to fit in with what everybody else is doing? And how does that mindset work as you are communicating that to clients? Because I can imagine that's probably sometimes a tough sell.
Yeah, it is. And I think what makes my perspective a little bit unique from a lot of other, agency owners would be that I've actually owned other businesses. I've actually hired other marketing agencies, other web designers, other, you know, whatever it may be. I've hired other experts to actually help me prior to Ugly Mug Marketing grow my businesses. And so I actually have been in their shoes. I know what it's like to have someone come to you, a web designer come to you and tell you, um, although very indirectly, make you feel like and believe that if you build a new website, a new shiny, fancy with all the latest bells and whistles, that somehow magically that is going to help your business grow. And what I personally discovered whenever I spent, again, this was 20-ish years ago. At that time, I spent almost $5,000 on a very basic website. And my belief was that that was going to transform our business. And the reason I believed that was because of what the web person kept telling me, right? They fed my suspicions, they fed this notion that having a website was going to magically explode the business. And so I carried that over into this agency. And at the end of the day, people don't want a website. They don't want a social media campaign. They don't want a new video. They don't want a new email campaign. Business owners want new customers in the door. They want existing customers to come back and buy more. They want growth. They want the end result, which is more money in the cash register. And that's got to be the focus. But it's so easy to get distracted by all these other things.
Okay, so let's say as a business owner looking to do something different, like we see what everybody else is doing, all the trends, and everybody's following the trends. How do you come up with something different to do? Are you pulling from what outside of that small niche is doing and trying to apply those things, or is it something creative altogether?
Yeah, let me give you a specific story from back in the lawn and landscape business. So back then, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but back then, social media really didn't exist. I mean, MySpace was probably around, but that would have been about it. And everyone in the space that we were in did radio, television, or print. Like those are the things that you had to do. And number one, when we started, I just didn't have the budget to do those things. They were expensive, especially back then. They were actually probably more expensive than they are today. And what we decided to do was we wanted to go after commercial clientele. That is the target for who we wanted to go after. So that's one small lesson here is number one, you have to be crystal clear about who is the right fit for your product or service. And so often entrepreneurs just jump into marketing things without getting crystal clear. So for us, it wasn't just every business owner that we wanted to, have as a lawn care client. They had to actually have property. They had to have a physical location with a lawn or landscape to take care of. Number two, more than likely, they would need to be a place that they actually cared about the appearance of their property, right? So if they're out in the middle of the country somewhere and, it's okay if they let the grass grow up 2 feet because no customers actually come there. So number one, get crystal clear. But number two, then what we did was said, okay, what is the most direct path that we can take to get our message in front of these people? And so what we did was every week we would go to a local donut shop and we would buy dozens of boxes of donuts. I mean, just a lot of boxes of donuts. And then we had these labels made that literally just had our logo and our phone number on the label. And so we would stick that big label on the top of the donut box and it would cover the entire top of the box. And what we would do is we would go into these businesses that we wanted as clients, and we wouldn't ask for the manager. We wouldn't ask for, who's in charge of making sure the lawn looks great. It was none of that. We would go in, for example, to a restaurant. We would go in the morning when we knew the cooks were in the back prepping. We would go in through the back door and we would just bring them a box of donuts and we'd say, hey, we were just in the area, wanted to drop these off for y'all. Hope y'all enjoy them. That was it. That was first point of contact. Then we had it on a schedule. So roughly once a month, we would show back up again. We would show up again with donuts. They would recognize us when we'd walk in. We'd say, hey, we're just in the area again. We'd start to get to know their names, start to, just small conversation. And what happened over time was this, that when the lawn guy didn't show up or when the lawn looked terrible and the manager comes in and says, hey, have y'all seen the lawn guy? Like, it looks horrible out here. What's going on? They would say, no, we haven't. But, there's this other company. There's this other company that comes by. They bring us donuts all the time. You should call them. You should talk to them. And what we did was we created what I would now call evangelists within all of these businesses who did the selling on our behalf. So by the time the manager calls us and says, hey, can you come give us a quote on maintaining our property? They had already been pitched by people within their organization on how great we are. And those people who were pitching us had never probably seen our work, right? But they're pitching it on the fact that we're friendly people. We show up with free gifts to them and we know them by name. And so that's an example of showing up differently than all the competitors and showing up directly to the ones that matter most to you.
Okay, so what that tells me is that's putting instead of trying to cram whatever the product is or service that you have down people's throat, you are establishing a relationship with would-be potential clients in the future. And you're just working on connecting with them, getting to know them, getting to interact with them, not selling, not presenting, none of that is happening. You're just building a personal relationship with somebody with no hopes, no push, no shove, no nudge even of a business. Here's my logo. Here's some donuts. Thanks. We'll see you in a month. And I'm sure there was a little bit different than that, but that was the thing. And so your intention was to ultimately land that client. But the path to go there wasn't, hey, here's my stuff, here's my stuff, here's my stuff. It was, hey, here's some free stuff that is not related to what I do at all, but it happens to have my logo on it. And I think that is such a unique way to go about that. Where did you get that idea from? How did that come about?
It's a great question. I don't know the origin of where that came from. What I do know is that my background, what I studied, over all those years was what's called direct response marketing. And the whole premise of direct response marketing could be boiled down into what's called the marketing triangle. At the top of this triangle, or you can call it a pyramid, same thing, but at the top of this triangle, you have your market. And so when you look at that, imagine a triangle or a pyramid. At the very top, the word market goes there. And the market is the who. Who are we actually trying to connect with? And that needs to be specific. So often people just show up and throw up, right? They show up on a platform, they show up on whatever it may be, and they just throw their message out there. They kind of word vomit all the things that are great about them, and nothing happens. And then they wonder why. So number one, we get crystal clear on the market, which we did, right? We identified we want commercial, we want people who care about the appearance of their property, and that narrowed it down pretty well. The next, so if you move from the top of the triangle to the bottom right, that becomes your message. You cannot have an effective marketing message until you are crystal clear on the who, the market, the people you are speaking to. And this is such a common mistake that entrepreneurs, business owners, anyone in any organization who's trying to communicate a message to the market is this, that so often we approach it through our lens. right? We say what we think should be said. We don't say what needs to be heard. And there's a huge distinction between those two things. You cannot understand what it is that needs to be heard if you don't really understand the pain points, the frustrations, the desires of the market you are speaking to. And there's a few exercises that I'm happy to jump into and kind of explain how we do that. But over on the left bottom of this triangle is the last bit, and that is the media or the medium through which you're going to communicate. And I can tell you from experience, so in my previous life, if you will, I spent a few years selling outdoor advertising, selling billboards. And so the target audience was I would go knock on doors and I would try to convince business owners to buy a billboard and try to convince them as to why that was so important. And what I discovered over the years of doing that was this, that most entrepreneurs, most people making marketing decisions, number one, they're not strategic. Number two, they rely on who is having the best sell on the marketing platform at the time. So if I was coming in and had a really great promo on outdoor space, I could convince them to buy a billboard. And then I would say, okay, great. What do you want to put on the billboard? They would say, oh, I really don't know. I don't have time to think about it. Go put something together and come back. So now they are trusting me, a salesperson, to establish the core message that they're going to spend $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a month on a billboard promoting with zero thought to actually what does the market need to hear. Number two, like, where is the market? Like, is the billboard that I'm pitching in the right spot based on their market? So all that to say, we as entrepreneurs, as business owners, have to be careful where we're going for this advice. And the best advice that I've ever heard comes from, I think it was Earl Nightingale, who originally said this, that if you want to drastically transform your business, the absolute best thing you can do is spend an hour a day in conversation with your actual customers, getting to know them. And that's where the core of all this whole triangle goes back to.
Right. So that brings it back to the person again, right? Because we're selling. All right. So the ideas that we have in our head, we're selling to theoretical people. But when it comes down to who's actually buying those things, they're not those theoretical people that we're thinking about. They're the actual people. And if you have actual people that are coming in and buying your products or services, and you're not thinking of them first, you're not communicating with them, you're not hearing from them, you're only listening to these theoretical people that sort of kind of maybe exist somewhere out there, then you're missing out on listening to the people who are actually there and showing up for you. And seemingly those people who show up at least once to your business to buy a product or service from you, if you treat them well, they will come back and do more business with you. If you hear them out, if you listen to what they have to say, if you care about them, if you treat them like a person, not a theoretical person, which changes the dynamic, because then your business becomes a people-centered focus, because a client-centered focus, because then you're focusing on those clients, the actual people that are coming in, on a daily basis, that are giving you their hard-earned money to buy whatever it is that you have to offer. If you think about them, if you take them at the core of why you're doing things, then of course your business is going to, double business or whatever, because you're listening to the people who are coming in to you.
Yeah, 100%. But what happens in the entrepreneurial journey is the opposite. We begin with a product or service that we think there's a need for, and it's probably often validated, right? We've started making something in our home, maybe it's baking something, and our friends love it. They tell their friends, and so we have this demand. So we've got the validation from the market. But what happens is, as the business or organization grows, we lose sight of that because now we're worried about invoicing, we're worried about HR, we're worried about hiring the next person, we're worried about, ordering bulk supplies, we're worried about a million things. And it's so easy for us to lose sight of the only reason we exist, any organization, is to bring value to the customer or to the client. That is the only reason that any organization exists. And it's so easy because of the million different plates that we have to keep spinning and keep going to lose sight of that core thing. And I personally believe that is the reason that business failure rate is so high. It's not because they didn't have a good product, they didn't have a good service, they didn't have a good idea. It's because the pull for the million other things, the urgent things, drowned out what is truly important. What's truly important is exactly what you said. It's listening and clearly understanding what our customers and clients want.
Okay, so as the leader, as the CEO of the company, what are some things they can do to not lose sight of the clients?
Very simple. Put time on your calendar, honor the time that's on your calendar to talk and interact with customers, prospective customers. Never lose sight of that. And the reality is, people listening may hear that and think, but if you only saw my schedule, like you would understand, I don't have time to do this. And I would argue that if you want long term success, you have to be willing to endure short term discomfort. What I mean by that is we have to be willing to interrupt what feels urgent in the moment to stay focused on what we would all agree with is truly important. And that is providing great value for the customers or clients that we serve.
Okay, so then that brings us into the leading yourself first kind of concept, because I need to be able to be in charge of my day, my calendar, and make time for those things. What does self-leadership mean to you? And then how can other people kind of apply that to their own lives?
I would say that, first of all, there is no other leadership without self leadership. That is the beginning of all leadership. Um, it's very easy, so I'm a parent, 4 kids, and we've all probably heard this saying that our children learn more from what we do than from what we say. The same applies in organizational life as well. Your team learns far more from what you actually do than from what you say. So I could get up in front of the team and say, look, we value showing up on time to meetings. That is a value. Like, you have to be on time for meetings. It sets the right tone with our clients. We're professionals. We provide exceptional service. So showing up late is not acceptable. But if I show up internally for meetings with my team late, what is that actually communicating to the team? That a lot of doublespeak, right? I'm saying one thing, but I'm living another. And what I can tell you is, for me and for most entrepreneurs, we have to start by examining ourselves first. It's very easy to look around and find the faults with everyone else. But we must first look internally and see if we are actually living with integrity. And that comes back to two words, and that's trust and suspicion. And so we live in a culture and in a society where the default is suspicion. Like, we don't trust people until they prove themselves to us. And what I would say is that in an organization that has a healthy culture, a culture of high performance, a culture of self accountability, a culture where people actually want to show up and do a good job, those are high trust organizations. Those are not organizations where suspicion is the norm. But here's the thing: when we give our word, whether explicitly, in other words, I use the words to say something, or implicitly, simply meaning that because I'm here, there's implied things that I've committed to, right? There's this gap. And it's in that gap that we are either furthering the trust or we're creating room for suspicion in that. And so the question for you or for me as a leader is simply this: where are my actions or my words building suspicion amongst the team? That is the very first place to start. It's not with trying to fix them. It's with trying to make sure I'm in alignment with myself and my words, whether explicit or implied.
Well, and okay, so as I'm listening to that, what I'm thinking about is when you are trying to make sure that you are doing the right thing, you are looking at all those other people. Yep, he's doing that wrong. He's doing that wrong. But you miss out on your self part, right? And if we do that, then we're leading by example, whether we know it or not. And those people that are around us are very likely doing the things that we're doing, but we don't know that we're the cause of those things because we have an outward look. So we need to look at ourselves first. And I think the way to do that, I think it's Jordan Peterson says you to watch yourself like a predator, like a snake hunts its prey. And if you can watch yourself like that, then you are aware, consciously aware of how you're acting throughout your day. And what that tells me is you're moving from the subconscious kind of standard operating mode of being through your day. By default, you're just going on default mode or autopilot, but you're bringing your conscious up to it. And you're watching yourself and how you act and how you interact and the things you say and how you hold yourself. If you can do that, I think correctly, and bring the conscious to the day and focus on what you're doing and how you're doing it, then you will be able to show up the way that you want other people to show up because you were doing that. But by starting with self first, then moving to outside. And if you can be the example, if you can be the person who is doing that correctly and set the example for the other people, that is wonderful. But you have to be careful there because okay, so it is easy, I think, to fall into, okay, the camera's on me, I have to act a certain way, okay, great, and then the camera turns off and you go back into, easy mode, autopilot mode. You have to do that camera on mode all of the time because otherwise what you're doing is you're faking it. And I think in this day and age, as we talk about suspicion, I think in this day and age, because we're so suspicious of people as a get-go, like that is the first thing that happens, and then trust happens later on, that suspicion informs people on how you are showing up in a false way, on how you're being fake. And it's so easy to see the fakeness seeping out of you because that camera's there and you're being shiny just for that moment. And the camera goes off, and then you slide back into autopilot mode. So you have to be careful about how you do that. But I think that would be the starting point, to start with self and to watch yourself like a predator watches its prey and act accordingly, like that camera's on all of the time.
Yeah, I love that and 100% agree, Chris. I think there's this thing called the Johari window. I think it's worth Googling. So if you're listening to this, when you can, Google that. And basically, what it shows, it's a matrix that shows that there's a lot of things in our lives that are conscious to other people, but unconscious to us. In other words, other people can see certain things about our lives, our behavior, the way we show up that we can't see. And it's important that we learn to bring those things to light. So it's important that you have people in your life who are willing to point those things out to you. And sometimes, oftentimes, those can be uncomfortable conversations because we don't want to necessarily pull the quote unquote skeletons out of our closet, right? We want to pretend that we've got it figured out and it's everyone else who needs the work. And one last super quick thing on this is that it's important to remember that we judge other people based on their actions, but we judge ourselves based on our intentions. Mm. So if I intended to show up to the meeting on time, but a kid was sick, but X, Y, or Z happened, I'm judging myself. I'm giving myself grace because my intentions were in the right place. I intended to be there on time, but this external thing affected that. But when we look around at other people and someone else doesn't show up for the meeting on time, we immediately judge them based on their actions. Were they on time or were they late? That is it. So I think that's an important lens as well. When we get into that moment of judgment, which we're all, I mean, that's human nature. Like we immediately jump to those judgments. I think it's number one, important to remember that we're judging based on actions, not intention. So it's great to understand the true story of what took place. And then the other piece or component of that is just simply that when we get furious about a situation like that, we need to get curious. So I have to remind myself of that. When furious, get curious.
Okay, so all right, really interesting. I think part of what this is that we're talking about is bringing our Okay, it's Carl Jung talks about this as incorporating your shadow self into your day, right? Into your who you are. And instead of, keeping those skeletons in the closet, we need to bring them out and integrate them into who we are so that we can become the actual person and not have sort of a duality to that. And having people in our life that tell us what we need to hear and not what we want to hear, number one, is really challenging to do because in this day and age, people don't like having those conversations, but is so important to have those people in your life that tell you, hey, you are acting like a jerk right now, and you probably shouldn't do that. And those, I'm sorry for those people because oftentimes those people get pushed outside of the circle so fast because people don't know how to take that. They don't because we don't want that information and they're just freely giving it because that's how sometimes those people are. We think they're being mean or judgmental or whatever, but really they're doing that oftentimes, I think, to help us become better. And we have to do the job of listening to what they're doing or what they're telling us so that we can actually become a better person and not push those people to the side or outcast those people because we need those people. And I can think of two or three people in my life that I have that are like that. And it is so refreshing to hear them say those things because that's exactly what nobody else wants to say. They're all thinking it, but nobody else wants to say those things. And we need those people. I'm so thankful for those people in your life, in my life. So if you have people like that, or if you are that person, uh, be accepting of those people. Tell them thank you. Tell them how much that means to you, that they're willing to have those tough conversations with you because it is so important to do so.
Yeah, 100% agree. What I've discovered in my life is that friends and family are usually terrible at this
Mm,
because they don't want to hurt our feelings.
mm,
So, in the early years of business, I would turn to friends, I would turn to family, and I would try to get them to give me help, right? Like trying to grow this business, I need your input, need your guidance, help me figure these things out, this problem or these opportunities. And what I discovered was, first of all, there's a big difference between advice and opinion. Um, and most of the time, the people who are in our immediate circles, this is not an absolute, but most of the time, they are great at giving opinion. They're actually not qualified to give advice,
mm,
in my opinion. Again, and I've got some criteria for what I now look for in advice. But the mistake I made early on was I took all these people's opinions and I tried to execute on opinions. And those opinions kept me trapped. Number one, they weren't telling me the blunt, honest truth because they didn't want to hurt my feelings. They would, you know, um, gloss over what they really wanted to say because of that. So that's number one. Number two, I've had to go out and hire coaches
mhm.
who are willing to challenge me, are willing to push me, are willing to tell me the things I don't necessarily want to hear, but I need to hear. And for that reason alone, if nothing else, if you can find a coach who's willing to do that with you and for you, call it a mentor. It doesn't have to be paid, but I've discovered personally over the years that when I do pay someone and I go into that relationship very, kind of bluntly telling them, like, this is why I'm here. I need you to have those hard conversations, that I'm always thankful for the investment I made in those relationships.
Yeah, and those coaches are oftentimes those are the people who really we turn to for those tough conversations, and they're doing such a good service by being that outside source and not being a friend or family member that's actually giving advice as opposed to opinion, and they're having those tough conversations. And I think I think there's the switch that happens that if we are paying for those things, we are oftentimes more apt to follow through with what they said because I value that thing that they're saying because I value it with my hard-earned money. I'm giving you money for this, and then you're accepting whatever it is that they're telling you in return.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, for me personally, I I value more for the opinions that I pay for than the ones I don't. It's just, I think it's human nature. We don't value the things that are free. And so for me, whenever I'm paying a mentor or advisor a lot of money, number one, to your point, I'm going to listen carefully. Number two, I'm going to execute because when I show up again, I don't want to have the same conversation again,
Mhm.
right? It's like, I gave you this advice last time. Here we are 2 weeks later. We're having the same conversation. I'm happy to keep taking your money, but if we're here to get progress done and make progress, then we got to get some action.
So, okay, when you talked about having a family of four, how do you have four kids or you have two kids?
For kids.
Four kids. All right. So big family. How do you reach a harmony, let's say, between your business life and your home life?
For years, I struggle with this. This whole notion of work-life balance slowly crept into society, particularly here in the Western civilization. And so for years, I really, really struggled with this notion of trying to establish this work-life balance. And the more I tried to bring my work and my personal life into balance, the more frustrated, the more stressed, and honestly, the more depressed I got. It wasn't until I realized that all of business and all of life is really seasonal. So in some seasons, my business is going to demand more of my time and attention. In some seasons, my family is going to demand more of my time and attention. And it's learning to be okay with that. And sure, there are times when they're both demanding a lot of time and attention. But what I discovered is that the more I tried to force each of these into this notion of perfect harmony, work life balance, the more stressed I became because I was fighting to contain things in boxes they could not simply fit within. And so, with this notion of life in seasons, what it does is very freeing. Just like, we're all familiar with the seasons that we go through, you know, winter, spring, summer, fall. Like, we know what to expect in those seasons and we become accustomed to those seasons. And some of those seasons are beautiful for some people. Some people love summer, some people love winter, whatever. And that's true for all of us. Like, there's certain seasons in my business that are absolutely beautiful to me. There's certain seasons in my personal life that are absolutely beautiful. But the flip side of that is true as well. There's certain seasons I don't like. I'm ready to get through those seasons. And so that's the lens through which I try to view it. It's not about, you know, keeping it in perfect balance. It's about going through the seasons. And just for one point of clarification, it is important to have clear boundaries. And I do have those boundaries in place, but I've given up the notion of keeping everything perfectly in harmony.
Yeah, I think the concept of having boundaries where you are trying to, you close your laptop, let's say at X time. I'm not going to do any more work after blank because now it's family time. But the thing that I struggle with, and a while ago somebody posed this concept, this idea, and I was like, well, okay, then that pretty well fits the bill for this. If I'm at work and I get a phone call from my mom, do I hang up or do I delay the call until later or whatever? Nope, I'm not going to answer. I'm going to answer the phone for my mom. But when I'm at home, do I answer the call from my boss? Right? That is kind of the question you have to answer. And depending on how you do with that, then that's where your boundaries maybe need to be a little bit restructured so that you can reach the full benefit of whatever season it is that you're in life and work and how they relate to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I love that example. And I think what happens is we try to create absolutes,
Hmm.
right? We try to say no personal while I'm at work, no work while I'm at home. And when we try to create those absolutes, we number one, I don't think we actually live those out very well. But number two, we drive ourselves crazy trying to uphold those absolutes.
Hmm.
I think for me, it's more so a matter of building boundaries, even within the context, for example, of the workday itself. So we operate pretty differently than probably a lot of organizations. Um, from the top of the hour to the 50, we have what's called no distractions. So during that time, it's focused time. During that time, you're not supposed to be getting up and talking to your neighbor. You're not supposed to be going, and how was your weekend, this or that. You're not supposed to even be messaging them on one of the platforms. It's focus time. Now, if you need to schedule a meeting ahead of time and meet and do all those things during that time, absolutely. Like, it's not that, it's just a matter of what we discovered was that when I decide I need to come ask you a question at 8:15, I'll come over and ask you a question. Well, it interrupts what you're focused on for 10 minutes. You get back focused on it, and then somebody else comes to you and says, "Hey, how was, did you watch the game this weekend?" Well, now you've eaten up 45 minutes of your time over two minor distractions. And again, what we have in place to an outsider sounds incredibly rigid. But what it actually creates internally is an enormous amount of freedom because we're able to focus on the things that matter, get those things done so that we actually do have time for engagement, for catching up and all those types of things.
Okay, so that is wonderful. I- I've done the Pomodoro technique for a number of years now, which is roughly 20 minutes on, you get 5 or 10 minutes off, then you go back through. And the benefit of that is you have focus time that you're doing the work, but you also have that little bit of a window after the work is done to do something that is freeing, something that is different than the work that you're focused on. And there's a beneficial byproduct for that because you in your brain you're focused during that time. You don't have to necessarily worry about the bink or bonk or whatever ding that happened from the email because okay, I have time for that later. It's not urgent. I have okay, you know, that kind of mindset of working for X and then not working for X is super helpful because then when you're working, like you said, you don't have the coworker coming up and asking you a question. Okay, great. And then you have to try to remember where you're at and get back in. And then another one. Nope, it's work time. And then you have that communication time, that 10-minute window where you don't. How okay, so where did that idea come from? How did you implement that into your business?
Um, through a lot of testing, like trial and error. What we sell at the end of the day, we sell time. I mean, we sell marketing services, but at the end of the day, it boils down to time. And so what I discovered was that without those parameters on our time, we would get to the end of the day and we would look back, and this is not just me, this is like collectively as a team when we rolled this out. We would get to the end of the day and we'd look back and we're like, what did I actually get done today? I mean, there's a million things on my checklist, and yes, I accomplished some of these tasks, but like, did I actually move the needle forward? And so it comes from, there's not one place that this comes from, but it comes from exactly what you're talking about. It comes from the need for focused attention and time, particularly for us who we're doing a lot of mental work, which requires deep thinking, to Cal Newport's book, kind of deep work. It requires deep work, deep thinking. And all the studies show that it's really, really difficult to get into deep work really quickly. In other words, I can't set a 15-minute timer and say, okay, for the next 15 minutes, I'm really going to dive into this thing. The way our brains process information, the way that we actually have mental residue that carries over from the previous task, all of those things are true. And so for us, again, it feels from the outside to people who originally initially hear about this very rigid and very like not fun, but the people who actually are in the organization who actually follow this process, which is all of us, but who follow this after the adjustment period, it is incredibly freeing to them, to their coworkers, and to everyone here.
Okay, so bring me through. How does this work for you guys in the space that you're in? Do you like? Is there like I'm sure there's not a bell that rings. Okay, now it's work time. Now it's not free time, but now it's not work time. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's literally just top of the hour to the 50 is focus time. The 50 to the top of the hour is distraction time. That is conversations. That is all the things that take place. And we've experimented, and we still experiment with, sometimes we've experimented with the first hour can be distraction time, and then we do like a 2 hour block of focus time. We've experimented with afternoon focus time. We've experimented with um, another one that was a really interesting experiment was we carved out an afternoon a week for 2 hours where the only thing that team members could work on is what we would call future work. In other words, they couldn't work on anything for a client. They couldn't work on anything for a prospect. They couldn't work on anything that's related to reporting for those things, any of that stuff. They could only work on things that would benefit their role, their department, or the future of the company. that was it. So again, we've just experimented with a lot, and what we currently have in place now won't stay forever. Um, it will stay in some iteration, meaning the focus time is still going to be a piece or component. The exact scheduling of it may likely change, may likely vary. We may increase it, we may decrease it, but we're always experimenting because in my previous life, I would go to a place of work, and throughout the day, people were visiting, they were chatting, and it was great. Everyone had a great time. But people were also bringing work home every single night. People were also having to come in on Saturdays and work to get caught up. And to me, I was like, you know what? I don't want this. Like, I enjoyed the conversation. I enjoy having friends. I enjoy all the things within the work environment, but my family matters a lot to me. Like, when I go home, I don't want to carry work with me. On Saturdays, I don't want to have to come back into the office because there's so much during the week I did not get done. And so I began way back experimenting with these ideas. And part of that just comes from personal development, right? Studying, reading, trying to maximize the effectiveness of my time while I'm at work and while I'm at home.
Okay, so I'm curious about the work on future concepts or ideas or projects. I've heard that before, and I can't remember exactly where I heard that from or what business was doing that. But did did you have any beneficial things that you have implemented or future projects that happened based on that future work time?
Absolutely. So we implemented that. That was probably 2 to 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and we implemented that at a time where most of the people across the board were mostly doing client fulfillment. In other words, every role within the organization worked with clients doing, marketing related projects. Since that time, over the years, we've have now more people in kind of what we would call corporate admin related roles. Those are people whose job and big chunks of their job are to do this future work, to look into the future and see
Mm.
where's the industry going, what's happening in the landscape, and what are the things we need to work on now to make sure that we bring the future that we want to reality. So I don't know if I answered that question, but
Yeah, because you took that concept and you applied that to what you have current people doing on a daily basis, not just in that specific time frame during that 1 week out of the month. Yeah.
correct. And I do think that we will probably bring an experiment version of that back, carving out a small window. And the reason is synergy, right? So right now we have a couple of people working on these future initiatives, but it's more profound and more impactful if we have all of us working on it, even though the majority of the people are only going to spend a very small chunk of time each week working on those future initiatives.
Okay, so I'm curious, with your outside the box thinking and the way you guys do work differently, do you guys have different protocols for meetings that are quote unquote different from what other people standardly do?
We do. So we have a very systematic, rigid meeting schedule. So I'm speaking internally here first. So every single week, every Monday, 1:45 to 3 p.m. is our team meeting. We have a very specific agenda that we go through every single week, whether I'm here, whether I'm not here, whether half the team's on vacation. The meeting happens, the agenda gets followed. And there's some really interesting things that we do there that are drastically different than most organizations. Um, Happy to share more of those. Every Tuesday are one-on-ones. So I'm meeting with leadership one-on-one, leadership's meeting with their reports one-on-one. And then we do leadership meetings once a month. That's leadership team coming together, talk about, big picture things. We do quarterly team meetings where it's the entire team. Again, there's structures around all this. Um, so we have this whole, it's very systematic in what we do. And the results that we've been able to produce and just you know, I'm a huge believer that most people want to show up to their job and do a great job. The problem in most organizations is we as entrepreneurs, as leaders, have not created a culture that enables that to happen because of our own bad ideas, because of our own bad habits. We create a culture that is chaotic, that is confusing, and where people dread coming to work. I mean, you can look at the most recent Gallup polls. I think the total number of people who are disengaged in workplaces is close to 70% of employees are disengaged. And I don't attribute that to the employees. I attribute that to the culture that the organizations have allowed and continue to foster. And so I'm a huge believer in creating the systems and the processes and the transparency so that the organizational culture allows high levels of autonomy amongst the team members. So whenever I describe all the things that we do, whenever I describe the focus time, whenever I describe all this, it feels very rigid. It feels very structured, and it is. But the flip side of that is our team members have tremendous amounts of autonomy compared to most organizations.
Okay, so being somebody myself personally who is into systematic approaches and processes for how things work, I, I can see, I guess, sort of the rigid part of it, but I also can see the freeing part because you have, a fair percentage of the day where there's not free time per se, but there's free time where they're open to do whatever it is that they're doing, and then they get back to work. So you have a good dichotomy between those two where you have the rigid, yes, it's this and this and that, but you also have the, okay, you're going to do this for this long, and then you can do 10 minutes of whatever you want, and then you come back. So I can see that. I'm intrigued by you talked about the Monday meetings and some of the very different things you do. Can you share a couple of those with us?
Absolutely. So I'll try to give you the high level version of this, and then um, happy to dive into more detail if you'd like. So number one, there's a very clear agenda, and that agenda gets followed every single week. Over time, we may experiment and add something new or something different into the agenda, but that would play out for probably at least a quarter. Like if we're going to experiment with something, we're going to try it for a quarter before it gets removed. So just in that alone, that creates a lot of psychological safety for the team members because they don't have to worry about, are we going to show up at a meeting today and Wayne's going to throw us a complete curveball, right? He's going to say, you know what, we're going to go chase this other thing over here now, because it is systematic. It is an agenda that gets followed every single week. And the other thing is, I don't lead the meeting every week. So we rotate through that every single week. So each week, somebody else gets to lead the meeting. The core of what we do that is drastically different is every single week, each person on the team presents their scorecard. And their scorecard is based on this idea that we call the field of play. And so if you think of a football field, if you will, um, at the very bottom, we have what we would call the baseline performance. So when someone starts with us, they have to get to this baseline performance. That's meeting the expectations. That's demonstrating they can live up to the core value. So it's very baseline stuff. Once they move up into that, they move into an area where the freedom exists, right? So until they get to that point, there's much more oversight, there's much more guidance. But once they're above that, that's where the freedom resides. But over on the right-hand side of this field, so again, think of it as a football field. Over on the right-hand side, there's an out of bounds line. And on the right-hand side is what we would call terminal out of bounds. So in other words, if you step out of bounds on this side, if you violate one of these things, and there's a list, you're going to be fired probably. So, stealing, lying, cheating, the common stuff that's going to get somebody fired. There's terminal out of bounds. So it's crystal clear. You do one of these things, like pretty good chance you're gone. The left-hand side of the field is what we call operational out of bounds. So these are things that aren't going to necessarily get you fired, but we're probably going to have some conversations about them. So showing up for meetings late, we're probably going to have a conversation about that. If it's a recurring problem with you, that's going to escalate that conversation. So we have an entire expectation guide that people get before they start here. And it says, we have a very big mission. We have a big vision that we're pursuing. These are what's expected of you to be a part of this team. So if there's something here that you are uncomfortable with, something you don't think you could live up to, let us know now. Like, let's have that conversation before you start a job here, because these are going to be things that are important to us. So there's the operational out of bounds. Then we have the goal line, right? So that's the big important goal that each person is aiming for each quarter. So we operate on a quarter basis. Below the goal line, though, there are 3 lead metrics. And so every person on our team each quarter establishes 3 new lead metrics. Those 3 lead metrics are designed to ensure that we reach whatever their goal is up above. And below that would be weekly commitments. So if my lead metric, for example, was, let's say I'm in sales, my lead metric is to, I'm gonna send 10, my lead metric is to reach out over the course of a quarter to 120 prospects and send them a custom, email introduction, maybe with a video or something. So that's my lead metric. Again, because I'm trying to drive sales here, right? That's my goal. My goal is a sales number up here. Lead metric 1 is I'm going to reach out to 125 or 120 people who I think are qualified with a very personalized touch. So week 1 commitment may say, week 1, research and identify, 300 potential prospects that I can reach out to this quarter. And then there's another lead metric, and then there's a third. So there's 3 lead metrics. And then in the team meeting, what's going to happen is, if I'm the salesperson, I'm going to say, okay, my commitment, lead metric 1 is to reach out to 120 prospects with a warm, personalized email. My commitment for this past week was to create a list of 300 people. I would either highlight that green if it was done, yellow if it was partial, or red if it was not done. The whole team sees that. So I run through what I did this week or last week, and then I run through my commitments for the coming week, for this week that we're currently in. So my commitment for this week, last week I created the 300. This week, I'm going to create 2 drafts of proposed emails that I'm going to send to people, and I'm going to send those to 2 people on the team for feedback to ensure that I'm saying the right things. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, and what a wild way to do that, because you have your expectations of what's accepted of them, what's acceptable for them to do, what you expect them to be doing, and then you give them the opportunity to set a goal. You on a quarterly basis, you break that down into monthly type of tasks and then weekly sort of tasks to break down that bigger goal into more manageable chunks so they can put action down on that. And then you hold them accountable to the entire team, and the entire team holds everybody else accountable to doing the things that they said they were going to do.
100% it. And what it has done is it's created a peer-to-peer accountability system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no longer me sitting down with somebody and saying, hey, you told me you were going to reach out to or build a list of 300 people. You only did 100. Like, what's going on here? Now what's happening is, in front of the entire team, this person is putting their thing up here saying, you know what? I said I was going to reach out to 300 or build a list of 300. I only built a list of 50. Then what's going to happen? People on the team are going to say, well, what happened? Like, why didn't you get to the 300? And there's probably a story around that, right? But what's going to then happen is the team is so conditioned to say, okay, well, you only did 50. Your goal was 300. You still have 250 left to do. So the question is, this week, can you do 50 plus? Can you draft those 2 emails? And it just creates this whole internal accountability system, because there's such transparency into what every person on the team is doing. And the last note I'll add on this is, I participate in this. In other words, my goals, my commitments are on the screen for everyone to see. And I want to be held accountable. I want to be challenged if I'm not doing the things I say that I'm going to do.
Yeah, well, so that's wonderful, because then you're leading by example. You're letting everybody in the team know that you're not above them. You're not outside of being able to do this, and you're not outside of being held accountable to the things that you said you're going to do. And what a wonderful way for somebody to adopt this into whatever field of business that they have, because I think this is acceptable for any type of business that they're leading, and will get the team to start to hold each other accountable in a way that they're both accountable to, but also helping to push up each other to motivate them to reach those metrics that they are striving for. So thank you for sharing that with us, Wayne. And Wayne, I want to say your journey, your insights, so inspiring. Outside the box thinking is such a refreshing take on all of this stuff. So thank you for sharing the wisdom on all of those things. And before we wrap up here, do you have any key thoughts or final takeaways you would like to leave the listeners with? And if they wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Thanks again for the invite and the conversation, Chris. I've enjoyed it. I love these types of conversations because um, although I answered a lot of the questions, um, just in the conversation, the dialogue itself, it sharpens me, it challenges me, and it also forces me to make sure that I'm living up to my word, not just to myself, but to my team as well. So thank you for that. The two final thoughts that I would like to leave with would be this. Number one, Michael Gerber has this really great quote that is, if your thinking is sloppy, your business will be sloppy. And what he means by that is that our businesses are most often a reflection of our thinking. And the same is true in our personal lives, but he's speaking to the business world. And so I think it's important that when we see our business and we see the problems and we see the challenges that we're facing, the best question to ask isn't necessarily, what do I need to implement to fix these problems immediately? The best question is, what about my thinking led me to allow or to indirectly create these problems that currently exist? That to me is the better question, because what happens is when we don't address the core root issue, which is the thinking, we spend our entire journey doing nothing but solving problems and putting out fires because we're never addressing the root cause. And the root cause always go back to thinking and then the subsequent actions that follow that thinking. So that was the first one. The second one's super short, and that's simply this: that consistency creates miracles, whether that's in our personal lives or our business lives. And to me, that is the ultimate challenge. The challenge is to be consistent in my words, in my actions, in my words, particularly to myself, the commitments I make to myself, to my family, to my kids, to my coworkers. So consistency creates miracles. And then your last question, where can people find me? Two places. They can find me on the Ugly Mug Marketing website, and that's just uglymugmarketing.com. Or for more kind of like the leadership related stuff, they can find me on my website, which is fireyourself.com.
Well, Wayne, thank you. Thank you for that. And listeners, be sure to check out Ugly Mug Marketing and follow Wayne for more incredible advice. Until next time, stay focused, lead with purpose, and take initiative.